No kid's Jewish education should end at 13. Adjerba offers Ontario high school credits infused with Jewish learning online for teens across the province. Ministry approved, intellectually demanding, Jewishly transformative. Adjerba.ca. Your teen belongs here.
We're working remotely. Days we're able to start earlier, work later, and have a higher productivity level.
Those are sounds from a protest held by thousands of Ontario civil servants who, as of January 5th, are under orders to be back in the office in person 5 days a week. Nearly 5 years after the pandemic, the unions say, the past few years have proven that workers can be just as efficient, if not more, at delivering work products, and that mandatory going back to 5 days a week in the cubicle is hard, outmoded, and an old-fashioned way of thinking about what work looks like today. Plus, it's bad for their mental health, bad for work-life balance, hard on childcare, and bad for the environment. Now, Ontario is just one area in a growing number of workplaces where the return to the office all week is being mandated. Some banks and large companies like Amazon have done this too in the new year. Alberta's civil servants go back to the office 5 days a week starting in February. But Toronto author and business journalist Jared Lindzon, who's also the host of the CJN's Geltwise podcast, says the 5-day work week, whatever form it takes, whether it's in the office or hybrid, is a relic of the last century, and he argues that many types of workers can be more productive and complete all their tasks at work in just 4 days. He's written a new book. It's called Do More in 4, Why It's Time for a Shorter Work Week. It's published by the Harvard Business Review. His co-author, Joe O'Connor, is an Irish-Canadian academic who's one of the gurus of the 4-day work week concept. Their book followed many companies who've tried this 4-day work week and seen more output from workers, not less. These firms, they discovered, have less absenteeism, less burnout. They can attract and keep their employees longer. And it also helps women, who usually carry most of the domestic load, achieve more in their careers. Bill Gates is on board. So is former U.S. presidential candidate Andrew Yang and even Senator Bernie Sanders. Some big companies, including Unilever, Kickstarter, Grant Thornton, Microsoft, and Lamborghini have adopted it in some departments, and so have some smaller Canadian workplaces, like the municipalities in the township of Algonquin Highlands and Merritt, BC.
So the book and the movement and the 4-day work week is really about getting past hours as our measurement of productivity and really trying to understand what people do that drives the business's goals, the business's performance, and then just focusing on that.
I'm Ellen Besner, and this is what Jewish Canada sounds like for Monday, January the 19th, 2026. Welcome to North Star, the flagship podcast of the Canadian Jewish News, and made possible thanks to the generous support of the Ira Gluskin and Maxine Granovsky-Gluskin Charitable Foundation. Jared Lindzon started writing about the 4-day work week during the pandemic, and it came at the same time as the world started adopting large language models of artificial intelligence, starting with ChatGPT, but also higher-level applications, which he says is now revolutionizing the long-adopted standard 5-day work week, which has a deep Jewish backstory as well. He discovered that more and more countries and companies, including in Canada, who've started this 4-day work week, got happier, healthier, and more productive employees, and the customers, well, he says most didn't notice any difference. Lindzon says the gold standard shorter work week is to move from 40 hours to 32 with the same pay, but 100% productivity. It's not one size fits all, though. Some companies have variations, which you'll hear about in a moment. It does work best, he says, with knowledge-based companies, like software developers or video game creators and public relations firms. Jared Lindzon joins me now from Toronto to dig deeper into this new book, Do More in 4. We're thrilled to have you here on the CJN's North Star. Welcome.
Thank you. Good to be on this side of the microphone.
Full disclosure to our viewers and our listeners, we are taping this on a Friday. So is this violating your 4-day work week?
Not me personally, no, but I appreciate you asking. No, I work for myself as a freelancer. My schedule is nowhere close to the typical calendar that most workers keep, and I probably work about 32 hours a week, which is a 4-day schedule. Just because I have the flexibility and take a long lunch sometimes, or used to sleep in, but then I had a baby, so now it's more like I'm on babysitting duty for a couple hours a day. But I definitely am not putting in a full 40-hour week most weeks, unless I have a ton of work, in which case I'll go to 50 or 60 if I have to. So
It never rains, it pours in the freelance
we're
world.
spending all week on podcasts.
And interviews and newspaper articles.
Yeah, exactly.
Which is what one does. But
Mm.
congratulations on the new arrival, both the two-legged one and the how many pages one?
200 and something.
Can it work for every type of employee and employer?
No. I mean, so, there's this expectation that, like, I'm going to come out here and say this is the thing that everybody should be doing. And it does work for more companies than are currently operating on a 4-day schedule. But like remote work, there are places where this works really well and unlocks all kinds of new values and opportunities and benefits. And there's also places where it might be more trouble than it's worth. And we're not advocating for a blanket approach. That's certainly not the point of the book. And we actually have a list of criteria in the book towards the end that sort of outlines what kind of organizations are ready to start moving in this direction and what they might need to do before they become ready enough. Like remote work before 2020, it probably could offer a whole lot of value in a whole lot of places that people aren't even considering yet.
We're in the month of January,
Yes.
and Ontario's government, the banks, the federal civil service have all been in the news saying that their employees now, the pandemic is over, you have to be in the office. Your book is coming out in a time where the attention to work-life balance and the work week is on the front page. Well, except for Iran and other things, but literally
A lot going
on
on
the
these
front
days.
pages.
Yeah, well, okay. So first of all, I would say that where the 4-day work week intersects with remote and hybrid work, there's a few places, one of which is that a lot of those sort of underlying organizational structures that would enable a team to work effectively on a remote basis also are those that allow them to work effectively on a 4-day schedule. There's also a lot of research that shows that employees would be willing to go back into the office all the time if they had a 4-day work week. A lot of the reasons why people want to work remotely are also solved by the 4-day work week. So less commuting, less money spent on lunches and gas, more time at home, more time with family, sleeping in, working out, doctor's appointments, whatever it is, doing chores at home. A lot of that stuff you get back with a 4-day work week. And so there's actually a lot of research, and we quote in the book that most employees, the majority, would be willing to go back to the office full time on a 4-day rotation. Where these two kind of split off and become entirely different subjects, at least from our perspective, is we're not talking about using the 4-day work week like remote work to sort of augment work that's already being done, just in a different way. We are advocating for the 4-day work week to be used as a rallying cry to completely redesign work in a way that better suits the reality of our AI world and sort of gets rid of a lot of the time wasters that exist in our everyday schedules, and really focus on the work that really matters. Because there's a whole lot of research as well, quoted in the book, that people are spending a lot of time at work doing stuff that does not contribute to the organization's bottom line. And it's really hard to get rid of that stuff. It's really hard to go into everyone's job and figure out what they're doing that actually matters for the business and what doesn't, and then really focus their time on energy on the stuff that drives the bottom line performance. That's what this is advocating for. It's about completely changing the way that we do things in a way that is beneficial to the organization and also offer something in return to the worker for doing that difficult work of changing how they've always done things.
You don't advocate for just all of a sudden, all right, you're done, 4 days, goodbye. This is a long process, from what I understand, with much planning and
Yes.
guidance and research and thought going into it before they ever take that leap.
Some organizations will spend 6 months or longer getting prepared to start a 4-day workweek trial. Some will start with half days. Some will start by doing 4 days of 9 hours and then take it down to 8. Some organizations start with summer Fridays and then expand from there. And all the while, they're finding ways to chip away at wasted time and to refocus people's energy and efforts on the things that matter. So certainly not a flip of a switch, but if you say, there's this goal to get us to a 4-day schedule in 12 months from now, 6 months from now, in order to achieve that, we need to hit certain metrics as an organization. We need to onboard certain tools. We need to get rid of organizational waste. We need to change the way we approach meetings and respect other people's times and get rid of bureaucratic layers that have been there forever but aren't really necessary anymore. And then once you get to that point, you will find often that there's enough time savings to get rid of a full day of work while still accomplishing as much or more in the remaining 4.
I'm into that. And also shout out to our CEO who went from our weekly staff meeting down to every 2 weeks, which is so much better. Yeah. And also I have to shave time after the meetings I run too. I'm taking that challenge on. But in Ontario, you may be a little young to remember this, but there used to be a thing called the Ray Days, where the civil servant under the premier was Bob Ray. So what he did was there was a 4-day work week in Ontario, and people had to work only 4 days, and they weren't paid for their 5th day. They were sent home. So it was a punishment and an austerity measure.
Yeah.
Tell me what your studies have found and your research has found that actually benefits a company or a business when you have a compressed or a 4-day work week. I'm talking about, profits, growth, retention.
Absolutely. So it sounds like the Ray Days, which I don't remember personally, although I've heard the name Bob Ray many times. It's also a model we've seen in other places as well. We talk in the book about the state of Utah did that at one point as an austerity measure. My co-author Joe was working with an organization in Ireland that did that as well. That is the flipping of the switch, though. That's not rejigging how you do things as an organization. That's just saying we can't pay you for 5 days, so you're going down to 4, but not changing the way that people are working and not engaging them in that difficult process of becoming more efficient with their time and earning that day off. So I would consider those almost different subjects. And it is a misconception that we have to sort of talk through almost every time we have this conversation. So totally understood. But to get back to your question, there are 3 primary reasons why organizations would go to a 4-day work week. The number one, huge boost to retention and recruitment. And we especially see that in organizations. We profile a few where they're trying to compete with some of the wealthiest organizations on the planet for the same talent. And there's just no way they're going to win on salary. A small tech firm in downtown Toronto called Sensei Labs, run by Jay Goldman, a Jewish business owner here in Toronto. And he was telling us how it became impossible to compete with Google and Meta and Amazon for the same engineering talent because there's just no way he's going to outspend these global behemoths. So instead, he decided to change the game to one that they weren't going to play, which was taking the work week down to 4 days. And in that process, he actually talked about how he came to realize that his staff were spending a lot of time doing things that they thought were really important to the business, like responding to emails quickly, attending meetings, didn't actually drive the bottom line. And so he found a whole lot of efficiencies just by getting rid of that. So the big number 2 one is mental health and well-being. A lot of organizations, and specifically in certain industries, we see it in healthcare, we see it in law, we see it in my industry, journalism, we see it in the nonprofit sector. The nature of the work itself is really taxing on individuals. And there are places where we've just come to accept burnout and, sabbaticals and mental health issues as just the cost of doing business. And, you push people as far as they can handle it, and then they inevitably have to leave and go do something else. And that is not a sustainable way to operate a law firm, a healthcare sector, a nonprofit. And so moving to a 4-day work week can really pay dividends in terms of keeping staff not just in the workforce before they burn out, but really engaged and capable of doing their best all the time, because on a day-to-day basis, they're able to recover adequately. And then finally, the big one for this era that we're in is technology and technological adoption. One of the things that I wasn't expecting when I started writing the book that really came through in the research was just the sheer amount of resistance that there is to adopting AI. People don't want to be responsible for training the robot replacements effectively. And there's real data on this that the majority of staff are sabotaging their organization's efforts to bring in this new tool that, frankly, is going to make their job less secure. And so sharing in the rewards of that automation, that, tech integration with a 4-day work week is a really effective way to get everybody on the same team and enthusiastically adopting these new tools rather than resisting them. And we show some statistics, but organizations that have moved to a 4-day work week have far higher success rates with technology integration than those that don't. And in the AI world, that 20% of time we're talking about, that 1 day a week is nothing compared to the efficiency gains of being a really good early adopter of AI and other tools.
And you mentioned some really famous names in the book. You got to interview Bill Gates for this book, founder of Microsoft, who's pushing this 4-day work week, and Andrew Yang,
Yes.
who you may remember, who supported not only, he was a presidential candidate, supported universal basic income in the United States. He wanted to
Nixon talked about the 4-day work week back in the 50s. Bernie Sanders proposed a bill to change us to a 4-day work week a couple of years ago in the United States. So this is something that is cross political lines, generational lines. This is a thing that keeps coming up over and over again, and then inevitably hits a roadblock.
So the roadblock would be what costs or downside for companies who might want to do or pilot this?
We actually, despite the political efforts that I just mentioned, we don't want this to be mandated at the political level, because all of those benefits that come with, earning it really go away once it becomes expected. We don't advocate for including this in the employee handbook, in the employee manual, making this policy. This should be a reward, a performance-based reward contingent on achieving certain business metrics. And it should be reviewed on a regular basis. Every organization that we included in the book has a 6-month review period, and if it is not going well, if they're not hitting those goals, if their performance is declining, they go back to 4.5 days, they go back to 5 days, until such time that they are able to achieve as much as they need to in the amount of time that they have. So, there's a lot of wrong ways to do it. And the organizations that do it the right way, that do it the way that my co-author, Joe O'Connor, has, spent years figuring out and working with organizations to implement, 93% of organizations that have operated on that model through the trials and pilots that he's run in Canada, the United States, Europe, and all over the world, 93% have kept the policy permanent because it proved beneficial.
Like the employees told you in the book, they'll never go back. Don't make us go back. You mentioned 3 reasons why it would be good, but you forgot to outline the 4th one, which I find important, especially for younger people who care about this stuff of work-life balance, is that it's better for the environment.
Yeah.
Remember during the pandemic, we all saw these videos of, fake, I don't know if it was fake dolphins swimming in the canals in Venice, and the environment came back. I thought it was real. Yeah. But it's better for the environment. You waste gas. And so all these things, which if you can get your work done, because I'm so guilty of it, the longer I have to file a story, that's what I take. I even take longer. But if I know I have to get on a plane and go to Florida, I get it done.
Yeah. So before I was giving you 3 reasons why companies would want to adopt this, but we also have a whole chapter on why it's good for society. And there's been a whole lot of research. The environmental thing is a big piece of it, but there's also gender equity. It turns out that men who are on a 4-day schedule chip in a whole lot more at home. And women are much more likely, especially caregiving women, are much more likely to voluntarily reduce their working hours in order to better manage their home responsibilities, but are often paid less as a result. And more importantly, for the long run, they're not considered for promotion and advancement opportunities because
they're not around. They can't be relied on. Exactly.
But if the whole company's operating on a 4-day schedule, the people who need that extra time for caregiving responsibilities are on an equal playing field with everybody else. Their salary's the same, but also their contributions are considered equal. It's not like we're giving so-and-so already this accommodation that makes them less worthy of promotion. They can't handle this big project because they're on a reduced schedule. The entire company's operating on that schedule. It doesn't let anyone sort of stand out for needing more time at home. And already we've seen places like the government of Tokyo and the national government in South Korea are looking at reducing the work week to 4.5 days or even 4 days as a tool for countering declining birth rates, because it has become necessary in most places, especially Toronto. If you don't have a dual income, either somebody's got a whole lot of money from somewhere else, or there's no way you're going to afford a family.
Tell me a bit about the variations or the different ways that this could work. It isn't just Monday to Thursday. for everyone. No,
Absolutely. So we spoke to a law firm in Vancouver that takes Wednesdays off. And by the way, they have one person, they have a staff of 20 or something like that. And every, twice a year, one person's on call. And they're not at their desk. They're just on call for that day in case there's an emergency. We've seen, the Friday is obviously the most popular one. There was a PR firm based out of New York, now fully remote, that does half day Monday. They start at noon on Monday. They end at half day on Friday. And that kind of helps them have coverage across 5 days. And they realize that no one's really expecting them to respond to emails first thing Monday, last thing Friday. And then, a lot of people already have summer Fridays as well. So it doesn't feel as big of a gap when you look at it that way. Some companies will let people choose their own schedules. Others will have, the 4-day rotation that is company wide. Some go by department or team. And from our perspective, anything that reduces the amount of hours that the 4-day work week, or what we might call work time reduction, which is, not as great of a title for the same kind of effort.
so we have to just be clear. It's not 40 hours a week or 37 and a half anymore. It's 32 is the goal. And you don't do busy work as opposed to focus work. That would be an answer to my life, because I work basically 6.5 days a week, sometimes 7. Speaking of Jewish, we talked earlier about a Jewish company that's doing this. Have you in your research found any Jewish organizations or schools or synagogues that do this, or can it not work because they're service organizations?
One thing, the only thing that comes to mind is the fact that, as you probably know, Israel operates on an entirely different weekly schedule, which people forget. And, a lot of times people will say, like, how can we operate if we don't work on Fridays? Well, in Israel, the weekend starts on Thursday night, and, their economy is doing just fine. It feels like a bigger obstacle than it proves to be once you realize that not even every country in the world has the same Saturday and Sunday off from work. Another thing that you mentioned, we were talking about nonprofit organizations, which I think a lot of Jewish organizations would fall into that category. Yeah, it is incredibly taxing work emotionally, and the burnout rates are higher than average. And this is one of those places where we've seen in this kind of work, retentions are always a challenge, because the for-profit sector is always going to be able to offer more money. And people go into the nonprofit world because they're passionate about the cause. But after years of, really taxing, difficult work, and a higher salary potential in the for-profit world, it's hard to keep people around. And the 4-day work week has proven to help balance the scales on both, in terms of offering something of value, not monetary, but of value, and also something that can help reduce the burnout. And especially with nonprofit organizations, a lot of the times the donors are really focused on giving money to specific causes. They're less focused, they're less keen to give money to, like, operations, keeping the lights on. And so it's really hard for these nonprofit organizations a lot of the times to get more money, to recruit better, to add new technologies. And so reducing the work week actually allows them to find efficiencies, to do more meaningful work in less time. And their donors don't feel like the money is going to, keeping staff happy, but to the causes that they want to contribute to.
So when a nonprofit like a synagogue, I don't know how it would work, but if there's God forbid, a funeral on the day you're off, there's someone there to cover, another clergy, another office staff. So I'm just thinking how it could work.
Yeah. We have a whole chapter called "But What About My Clients?" And in that chapter, we talk about all the different strategies that we've seen organizations, really innovative organizations, that have found ways to cover that gap in ways that, often their clients don't even notice. Some even applaud them for, making it work. And we find that this challenge often looms larger in the mind. We think that, we're going to be needed so badly by all of our clients, stakeholders, every day that we're supposed to be around. Reality is, it's often not as big of a deal in practice. And we all have cell phones. We're reachable. If there's an emergency, if we need to be called back into the office on a Saturday or Sunday, we do. Same thing goes for this 5th day as well.
Would you say that this would be a CEO issue, that the CEOs maybe couldn't take the 4-day work week off, but the employees could? Like, I'm just trying to figure out how would you work a call tree, you know what I mean, to a seniority tree with a 4-day work week when we're facing, a world where things are unstable?
Yeah. Well, so, first of all, we talked to some organizations where the leadership volunteers to be available on that 5th day so that the rest of their team could take the time off. And if leaders are willing to make that sacrifice of their own time, then they're more than welcome to do that. Often we find that these leaders too, they're working 6 or 7 days, and going down to 5 is actually a huge break.
Yeah,
Yeah, exactly. So like that's not uncommon. And again, we do live in a world where we are reachable all the time. Some organizations will take that as a way to um, encroach on their staff's personal time and expect them to respond to emails when they're really not supposed to be working. But on the flip side, in healthier organizations, that same technology enables us to manage crises, effectively when we're not at work, so that we can take the time away, knowing that if there is some sort of tragedy or emergency or issue, we are reachable. And so, to answer your question, a lot of organizations say explicitly, this is not a vacation day. If you're going to be out of town, if you're going to be fully unreachable, you take a vacation day. We still expect you to be on call for that 5th day, but you're welcome to use that time however you'd like. There's just a chance that, a couple times a year, we're going to need to call you in to do some extra work, or because there's an emergency we didn't anticipate. And most people are willing to make that trade-off.
Yeah. I mean, you have to check in with your email 3 times a day or some other rule while you're at the golf course type of thing.
There's one company we talked to where they said that they have one person who's required to check in the company email 3 times a day in order to make sure that there's no emergencies going on. Or they designate one engineer who has to be within 10 minutes of a keyboard at all times once a quarter. And they do that on a rotating basis. That, again, this challenge often feels a lot bigger in, theoretical terms than it proves to be in reality.
It was the Jews who invented the Sabbath.
Without Jewish workers, we'd only have Sundays off. That is historical fact, by the way. That is, originally the weekend was Sunday, and then Jewish workers complained that they were getting the wrong day off, and so they were given Saturdays, but then the Christians were upset that anybody was working on their holy day. So to settle the matter, there was sort of this agreement that everybody would get both days off for both, at the time, major religions in the United States.
Besides the Jewish part, there was also an anti-Semite who helped shorten the work week. Who was the industrialist who we can thank for the 5-day work week? We'll give you a beat, and then Jared, tell us.
It was Henry Ford, who we do applaud for his forward-thinking organizational structure, and also very clearly challenges that he had with Jews and discrimination and all of that. He was the first major industrialist to introduce the 5-day work week back in 1923 on a trial basis, and permanently in 1926. Prior to that, people were working basically around the clock. Henry Ford was the one who realized that he had sold a car to everybody who had enough time and money to afford a car. And if he was going to sell more cars, he needed staff that had enough money to pay for it and had enough leisure time to drive it. These were very forward-thinking policies at the time, not at the kindness out of his heart, not because he wanted his workers to have a better life, but because he had run out of people to sell cars to and wanted to extend the market from the upper classes to the masses.
One last thing. A lot of people might say, well, great, if I get all my work done in 4 days, they're just going to make me work more on more stuff. They're going to pile it on like they did during the pandemic.
So that is called performance punishment, because people who do their job really quickly are going to get more tasks to fill the time they saved, whereas the colleague who does the exact same thing really slowly, works through their lunches, maybe works through their evenings and weekends, they're going to be praised and promoted for their dedication. And we talk about how equating time and presence with effectiveness and productivity is this outdated relic of the Industrial Revolution. And it really causes a lot of damage. It causes people to take less vacation time. It adds a lot of pressure to be present more than to actually drive, outcomes. And it's this incentive structure that isn't necessary in our modern world. And so the book and the movement and the 4-day work week is really about getting past hours as our measurement of productivity and really trying to understand what people do that drives the business's goals, the business's performance, and then just focusing on that. What we're advocating for isn't just removing a day from the work week. It is rethinking some of the underlying structures of work that have existed since the Industrial Revolution that are long outdated in our modern economy.
Congratulations on the book.
Thank you.
I will put the links here. I'll give away this copy to one of our listeners who can write to me and say what they would do. If you are the first person to write to us when you see this and tell us what you would do on that extra 1 day a week from work that you would be off, and you would send it to info@thecjn.ca, you will be the winner of this copy of Do More in 4. I thank you very much for being here on the CJN's North Star, and congratulations.
Thank you so much.
And that's what Jewish Canada sounds like for this episode of North Star, made possible thanks to the generous support of the Ira Gluskin and Maxine Granovsky-Gluskin Charitable Foundation. Our show is produced by people who don't just work 4 days. Zachary Judah Kaufman is the senior producer. Michael Freeman's the executive producer. Alicia Richler is the CJN's editorial director. And Brett Higgins wrote the theme. Are you working a 4-day work week? What do you do? Share your thoughts. Again, we're at info@thecjn.ca. Thanks for listening.